Tonight I'm just going to take you through the maggot flies that I tie for Mike Ladle and how we came to develop the fly in New Zealand for use in England. The background is that in England they have seaweed flies which land on the seaweed and basically lay their eggs there, and the eggs hatch and turn into maggots, and every spring tide the water gets high enough to flush those maggots into the sea, and at that point the bass and the mullet in England come in and feed on the maggots. Now Mike spent a lot of time explaining to me what the maggots looked like and what was important about the characteristics of a fly, and he tried many flies over the years unsuccessfully. And so what we did is we sat down and we thought about it, and we realised there's a few critical things that any maggot fly would have to have. One, it had to float in the surface film. Second, it had to have an element of movement about it, because the fish apparently only take the maggots when they're still wiggling, so they're only in the water, they only take them for a very short period of time, and then the maggots die and the fish won't take them anymore. So what I did is the first series of flies I sent through, I used foam all the way through and tried to develop something using rubber legs for movement and tan coloured chenille and a brown foam body, but it didn't float high enough for Mike and he wasn't happy with the result. So we went back to the drawing board, and the second iteration, which I'm going to tie tonight, has a small segment of foam at the front of the hook, and it uses white chenille that I'll taper so that it doesn't unravel, and also uses rubber legs. And in essence, what he found was that when he used these flies in the UK, the mullet would actually take them quite readily. So I tied a whole heap of them for him. Some of them worked really well, and as a consequence of that he sent me some hooks over to New Zealand, and now I've got to tie some more to his specific instructions. So tonight that's what we're going to do. So I'll take you through the steps involved in making a maggot fly for use in the UK. And in actual fact, I've never seen the maggots. I've never seen the mullet or the bass take them. So this is all based, the fact that we've got to develop a successful fly in New Zealand is all based on the knowledge that Mike has about what the fish are taking and his ability to tell me what I had to tie. Okay, there's three basic elements to the mullet flies that I tie for use in the UK. The first part is white chenille, which I have to taper with a cigarette lighter to stop it unravelling. The second piece, or the second key element, is bungee cord rubber, which I have to then cut to the right length for the fly that I'm tying. And the third part is I use foam tube that's used in the manufacture of booby flies, and I'm going to cut a small section of that off, and I'll prep all of these, or prepare all of the components, and then I'll just assemble a number of flies one after the other. So the first step that I'll show you is how to taper the chenille. Okay, the first thing that I'm going to do is just show you how to taper the chenille that I'm using. Not all chenille that you can buy you can heat like this. Some of it you'll heat and it'll set alight and it'll just head off down towards your fingers like a dynamite cord. But this stuff's micro chenille, so generally if I just touch it, that's probably enough to, you can see carefully that it's basically sealed the end of that chenille nicely. The second part is the rubber that I'm going to use to give movement to the fly. Essentially all it is the rubber core of a bungee cord, and I just strip the casing back and I'll cut it to length. This piece here is a little bit too long for the fly that I'm going to tie, so I'll just cut off a small amount of it so I get the length that I want. Originally I was also tapering these with with the cigarette lighter as well, but it's totally unnecessary. You leave it as it is, it's fine. So that's all ready to go. This is the foam tube that's generally used in booby flies to make the eyes. All I'm going to do is cut a small section of that off it. If you look at the fly itself, I'm not going to need very much, so I'm only going to cut a very small sliver of it off. So here we go. Hopefully this will all work nicely. And there it is, ready to go. So the fly that's being, the thread that I'm using on the fly here is Kevlar. It's white. I just threaded onto a CNF bobbin holder. Essentially what I'm going to do first is I'll just wrap a small amount of thread at the front of the hook, and the idea is that this is actually going to hold the foam tube when I slide it on. So we'll just finish that off. Trim it. And then the next step is I'll put some super glue on that, and then I'll thread the foam tube onto that and allow it to sit, and then I'll tie the back half of the fly after that. Okay, so just got some Zappa Gap super glue here. I'll just stripe a little bit near the front to hold the foam. I'll take the hook out, and then I'll slide carefully the foam cylinder around the hook, trying not to cover myself in super glue, and just carefully pull it to the front of the fly like that. So then I'll just tie on the thread, some thread behind the foam cylinder that I just slid on, cut it off, and slowly work this to the back of the fly. When I get there, I'll get the smallest piece of chenille that I took, and I'll just tie it in carefully on the fly. So just tie it in as a tail, so it just looks like a little maggot sitting at the back. A couple of wraps up to hold it. Pick up the second piece of tapered chenille and just figure of 8 that through, so that it sits nicely on the hook, and then stick out a short piece of rubber at the front, same way, figure 8, soft wrap there, soft wrap there, tighten it up, and then whip finish the fly. And that is a maggot fly. Just tweak that up a bit, get everything nice and lined up. So what I do now is I get a small amount of UV epoxy. I use Bug Bond, and I basically just stripe the back of the fly to hold everything in place. And then we get our UV torch and lock it all into place. And that, as they say, is the business.